Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Paddock Talk Podcast, episode 2. Today, we're going to be looking at the engine freeze and the Red Bull announcement, a potential return for Rich Energy, and also potential rumour of some new F1 teams joining the sport. So, if we just jump straight into it, we're going to talk about the engine freeze and the Red Bull takeover of the Honda engines. So, last week, we did actually look at the announcement of the engine freeze and what that means for Red Bull. Obviously, they this is pivotal for Red Bull really, and it's why they've now announced that they're going to be buying the Honda IP, the intellectual property, and be taking over from Honda themselves. They're going to be setting up their own facility at Milton Keynes on their campus, as they like to call it, and they'll be using as well partner with a Austrian firm, AVL, to help with the sort of the dynos and things like that in the future. They're going to be supplying both, obviously, themselves and AlphaTauri, and the engine specifications will be frozen at the beginning of 2022. Now, what this means in terms of Honda is Honda are going to continue developing the 2021 engine as the season goes on. Obviously, there's going to be the tokens as usual, but they're still going to be developing it. And they're also Red Bull are also going to get a 2022 engine, which is essentially going to be a freebie, and that engine is going to be used from 2022 to 2025 when the engine freeze takes place. And by that time, in 2026, it will be when the new specification engine comes in. We don't really know what that's going to be yet. Red Bull hope that their facilities and everything will be completely up to speed and running as all of the major engine suppliers, but as good as a Mercedes or a Renault or a Ferrari. And so from there, they'll be able to then go on and make their own engines. But obviously, that's quite far in the future. We're going to talk about right now. What do you guys think?
So I guess it's the news we kind of all expected to come once the engine freeze got confirmed. It was a mere formality that this would follow, and so it's good to finally get it confirmed. Realistically, in Red Bull's shoes, it was the best case scenario for them in their current predicament. If we have a look at the current engine manufacturers on the grid, Mercedes already supply themselves, McLaren, Aston Martin, and Williams. There was no room for Red Bull, and we've seen previously their hesitance to do so, to supply Red Bull, because obviously they're a potential title rival. Why would you strengthen someone who could potentially compete against you? Ferrari offered to supply them engines, but Red Bull turned it down, which is unsurprising considering how uncompetitive Ferrari were in 2020. And that leaves us with Renault, which under the current regulations, if Red Bull hadn't found this solution, then it would have been Renault that would have to supply them. But Red Bull's eyes, it wasn't a good case scenario. Their refusal to return to Renault is probably a decision taken based on preserving their own image and not being seen to look weak. We've seen in the past on the driver front with the likes of Kvyat and Gasly, Red Bull don't like to go back on their own decisions. So if they were meant to go back to Renault after slagging them off all those years in the hybrid era, then it wouldn't have been a good look. So ultimately, in their current predicament, this was Red Bull's best bet. It keeps them in the sport, which can only be a good thing. We need more teams, not less. And it's quite ironic that since their last championship, at least up until the Honda years, in the hybrid era, Red Bull consistently put the blame at Renault's door for not supplying them with an engine to be able to compete against Mercedes. And people have always been saying, well, why didn't they make their own, like Mercedes, like Ferrari, like Renault? And now they are.
Yeah, I think obviously, as you said, I think obviously the engine freeze coming in. I'm on the fence about it, whether it is really beneficial for the sport, because at the end of the day, obviously the engine freeze, obviously the point of F1 is obviously to develop your cars and the engines and so on. So I'm sort of on the fence of that. But as you said, it's good for the sport. Obviously, AlphaTauri and Red Bull, I'm saying in the sport, obviously, that's 4 cars staying on the grid. We don't really want to go down to 16 cars. That would be catastrophic. I think it's going to be quite a good one for Red Bull.
I'm actually quite happy that the news just came out that they've announced that they're going to be running their own engines for the future, because I think that's just what they need. They're a forefront of chassis development and they're a top team. So for them now to be able to build on that and become this engine manufacturer in, obviously not now, but in 5-10 years time, that's just only better for them and the sport. which we could see potentially see more people trying that as well, which then just makes the whole engine formula, when it does actually change, it just makes that a lot more of an intriguing prospect, I think.
Yeah, I think, like you were saying, it really, Red Bull have flirted with leaving. In the past few years, there's always been some rumors going around. They don't really seem to stick away. I mean, we could say that about any team really, but Red Bull, especially, I think that they've said, or oh, if we don't really get an engine supplier, or the rules aren't really in favour, they're going to leave. But this is a massive commitment for them. I mean, taking on this project, taking on Honda's IP, taking on building their own engine facility, going to the future. Again, I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but going into 2025, 2026, they're going to be building their own engine, and then we're going to get onto this much later, but for new teams coming onto the grid, they might be able to outsource their engines and build up their own model, because it is so hard to be an engine manufacturer and become a new engine manufacturer in F1. Just look at Honda, how they struggled from 2015 to 2017, and even 2018 a little bit as well. It took them 4 years, and they took a year off in 2014 to help prepare themselves. So this is a really, really good deal for Red Bull, in my opinion. And as well, it also gets rid of the problem for them of, obviously they weren't a supplier team, but they kind of were. That like they were having to buy the Renault engines, and now they don't have to be a B team. Like, they can develop their own engine. They don't have to build their car around what the Renault cooling is going to be. They're going to have complete control of that. And so I think going forward, obviously I don't want to get caught in the false hope of Red Bull being title challengers or whatever, but I think this is a huge benefit for them, and fair play to Red Bull for doing this, because as Horner pointed out in his statement, they are an energy drink, and this is slightly crazy, but here we are, and I think it's great.
You got to give massive respect to Red Bull. They invite a lot of criticism for their actions, like their criticism of Renault, in my opinion, was a tad too far. But for this, you got to give them massive props. They're becoming a fully fledged manufacturer now, and the good thing is they got nowhere to hide. So if something does go wrong, if their car is uncompetitive now, they can't point to outside sources for blame. They can only look at themselves. And also, I kind of echo your sentiment, Tom. The fact that the experience with Honda has probably kind of propelled this deal, because they probably didn't want to go back to Renault or Ferrari, because their experience with Honda has allowed them to have the experience of having an engine designed around their car. So they're able to tell Honda what they want, and Honda are able to deliver it. Whereas with Renault, they were buying an engine for a lot of money and they having to fit it around their car. Whereas now they're in complete control of their own destiny, which can only be good for them.
Yeah, I think there's two things as well I'd say to take note as well. Obviously, the first thing is that I believe Honda's Formula One engine manufacturer is based over in Japan. So I think now that it's all localized for them, I think that'll make their life much more easier when it comes to developing their car. Because obviously you've got Mercedes, who have their engine department down the road from their base in Brackley. And the second thing as well is that obviously when it comes to 2025, I'd say they're in really good stead to convince a new manufacturer to come onto the grid, because obviously, as you said before, Tom, about the Honda and how long it took them to develop their engines to a good enough level really to compete and to be reliable. And I think obviously if you've got that foundry, the base to really grow upon that, I think luring a manufacturer into F1 will be quite easy.
And I think it's also important to note where Red Bull were at the end of 2018, or the summer break 2018. They ditched Renault, and obviously their options were realistically only going to be Honda at that point. They talked with Ferrari, they held discussions with Mercedes, but that was always going to be a no. And they went with Honda. They used AlphaTauri, or Toro as it was back then, as a sort of test dummy to see how it would work. And it was a huge risk. It was a huge risk, and fair play to them. They saw where McLaren made their mistakes. McLaren didn't buy into the culture. They were very arrogant, I want to say, McLaren. They said, oh yeah, it's going to work immediately. And obviously, they did have it first. They did have those teething problems. Honda have got over those teething problems, so they have grown, since they first came in. But it was still a huge risk from Red Bull, and they bought into that culture. They worked very respectfully with, the Japanese side of things, because they do work culturally different to a lot of the European teams. They've really bought into that. And like I said, I think they've ended up in the best situation they can. Obviously, they don't want Honda to leave, but from what the cards they've been dealt with, I think it's ended up pretty perfectly for them. Obviously, it's going to be an investment, but I think it's pretty much perfect for them.
It's also huge for Max Verstappen as well, for the future of him at Red Bull.
Exactly. And just following up from that, what do we think this holds for the future of Max Verstappen? I mean, personally, or from how I look at it, they've laid all their cards out on the table now. They've said, this is how committed we are to F1. This is we've shown this is our long-term ambition. It's been reported this week as well. It's sort of finally been announced or confirmed that Verstappen does have a performance clause in his contract, should he want to leave. And obviously, the only place he would go is Mercedes. So yeah, what do we think the future holds for Max Verstappen?
I think this is just very important for him, and just for both parties. Red Bull have to back up them including the performance clause. Max also has to back up. We know he will. He operates at a very high level. I think that he's going to be still at the top of his game. I don't see the clause really affecting him in the driver market. I think he's going to stay at Red Bull. It's a very big thing to have lingering over his head, though. That clause of, if he's not happy with the team, he can just leave if he wants, and that will then create a massive shake-up if he does. But personally, I don't see him leaving, but I think it's a very big step forward for him in his career.
Yeah, definitely. I think that Verstappen's contract, I think even with Red Bull, I think he's built up quite a good relationship with Red Bull. Obviously, he's been with them since 2014, I believe, when he joined the junior team. And obviously, ever since, it's just been a rapid rise to the top, really. So I think he's got that loyalty to Red Bull. But the question is if he still has the patience, because end of the day, how old is he now? I believe he's 23, I believe. And, he's got... Well, he's probably the hottest prospect on the grid, or is the hottest prospect on the grid, and he's probably the driver, probably after Lewis Hamilton, the most in demand. So, everyone would want him if he did want to break the clause, but the question is, how does he get in? Because Mercedes seemed quite firm on getting George Russell into the team. Mercedes is the only really plausible one in my eyes. I just can't see, unless Mercedes decide to go externally for their next driver, I think it's probably his best bet to probably stay at Red Bull, because obviously they've shown commitment to the sport for the next few years. They're still going to be up there. I don't think there's going to be any sort of drop-off like we saw with Ferrari last year. He's probably best playing his cards out for the next few years at Red Bull and seeing where he ends up come the new engine regulations, because that's probably his best chance then to maybe jump ship.
Yeah, and I agree with you on the point that Russell does seem the next man in line to step up. So if Hamilton does decide to move on at the end of 2021, or if Mercedes decide to get rid of Bottas and promote Russell, he is the most likely option. But one thing I would bear in mind is when people talk of Lewis Hamilton, they speak of the driver. They very rarely mention about Lewis Hamilton, the brand. Like, Lewis Hamilton, the brand, is absolutely huge for Mercedes. It's a huge asset. Like, can't make any mistake about that. Hamilton is the global attraction of Formula One. There's no other driver with the star asset like him. And although Verstappen's not on that scale, and he doesn't put himself out there, he doesn't intend to be this megastar. He is inadvertently a PR dream. At only 22, 23 years old, the following he's got is absolutely astronomical. And the question you got asked about George Russell is, does he bring that? He's built up a nice fan base, but has he got that star attraction? Arguably not yet. That's what I'm putting out there. If Hamilton walks away and then they have Russell Bottas,
yeah, they're going to need a star driver.
Yeah, I'm sure Mercedes' star attraction or like their global appeal would plummet. Verstappen could be the one to follow on from Hamilton in that regard.
and I don't want to talk too much. Obviously, we did discuss a little bit about this last week as well. But like we were saying, I feel like it's either Verstappen or it's either Russell, but Russell's more likely. But Verstappen, you need Verstappen if Hamilton goes. So then what do you do with Bottas? It's very complicated and it's still quite far off. But just also quickly on Red Bull themselves, if Verstappen does go, they're in some serious trouble because they. So I would guess Perez would then stay unless he's a horrible disappointment, but I don't think he will be. But he's not particularly young. He's what, 31, 32?
Yeah, 31.
What would you do? Yeah, bring back Albon, bring back Gasly. That's not a top team anymore. And it's really then I talk about how Red Bull have got their not a dream scenario, but they've got a really good situation on their hands. They're really committed. If Verstappen then does go, well, hold on. Well, yeah, exactly. Where's your loyalty? We've just, basically not done this for you. Like a Alonso McLaren, we sort of laid out all of our cards on the table, and they've still gone no, and that's a big slap in the face, I think. So it's very interesting.
Yeah, so that's in the future. Now moving on to the present and away from the topic of Red Bull, we are going to move the discussion on to another energy drink company with a history, albeit much shorter, Rich Energy. For those who have only recently got into the sport or are not clued up on the saga involving Rich Energy, best to explain them is a very controversial energy drink. They pretty much came out of nowhere at the beginning of 2019 by being announced as a title sponsor to the Haas team. Unfortunately, that for them and for Haas, that the partnership between the two would only last for half a season before Rich Energy reportedly cut ties, citing poor performance both on and off the track as the defining reason for the split. Since then, Rich Energy have continued their endeavours into motorsport and had relative success in series such as the British Superbike Championship. Now their founder, William Story, has revealed on video over the weekend that his company are ready to mark a return to Formula One starting this season and are already close to penning a deal with the current team on the grid. He did say that they had looked into entering the sport as a new entity in line with the new regulations, but they will instead now become a sponsor to a current team before increasing their involvement to become the main title sponsor of said team in 2022. So I think the best place to start with this discussion is by narrowing down the teams that it could be. So I think automatically we can rule out the traditional top three, Mercedes, Red Bull, Ferrari. With the controversy Rich Energy have been embroiled in, it probably would not suit the corporate image of those big teams. Then if we move down to the midfield, Aston Martin have already secured a long-term title sponsor. Rich Energy founder William Story did say that they did hold talks with McLaren previously, but that didn't come to fruition. And with McLaren already releasing the 2021 package, it's unlikely now that it will be McLaren. And then AlphaTauri we can automatically rule out as well because they are the affiliate team of Red Bull. And I can't see Alpine either being a potential destination. So that will leave us with the three remaining teams that made up F1's Class C in 2020, Alfa Romeo, Haas and Williams. With that in mind, do we believe the Rich Energy deal is legit? And which of that trio do you think it could be?
I reckon for a start, I don't think it's going to be Haas for a start because they've pretty much burnt all their bridges with Haas given the 2019 scandal, really. I don't think Gunter Steiner or Gene Haas or anyone there really wants to see William Story in the Haas factory ever again. Williams, I can't see it being them because for a start, they've already unveiled their 2021 merchandise and there's not any sign of Rich Energy on there. I know it's quite a questionable sort of take on or belief on that, but I don't think it's that simply because if they had been with Rich Energy, they would have Rich Energy merchandise. But I do think Alfa Romeo is probably the most plausible one. For a start, I think that obviously Alfa Romeo have struggled the last year. And as well, obviously their future is a bit uncertain too, given obviously the new merger in the Alfa Romeo hierarchy. I think as well that there's also been a lot of word as well spreading about Rich Energy being with Alfa Romeo, albeit on a minor level, like on the front wing possibly, and obviously, as you said before, it expanded to a full title sponsorship in 2022. I think as well, it just makes the most sense, really. I think Alfa Romeo, they're not really in the best position financially as of late, I do believe. And I think Rich Energy, I think they've got money behind them because obviously their sponsorship in British Superbikes and the British Touring Car Championship, for example. So I think they've got money behind them, but it's a question of how much and whether they are truly legit now after the 2019 scandal that obviously saw them pay next to nothing for the Haas sponsorship.
Yeah, I think it will also be Alfa Romeo. Like you said, there's been some recent talks that Alfa Romeo themselves might quit, and it will go back to Sauber. So we could see a Rich Energy Sauber, which would be slightly horrifying, but might be what we're seeing. I think it's also worth mentioning that this guy is a notorious waffler, and he could just be making it up. We can't rule out that possibility.
Yeah.
Obviously, in 2018, I'm pretty sure not a single penny went to Haas in the end after agreeing a multi-million-pound contract. And they also went through a mutiny during 2019, where the admin tweeted out, pictures of William Story. I don't know where he was photoshopped somewhere. I can't quite remember, but this company is a mess. And to be honest, I don't really care if they sponsor an F1 team. Good. They just need to have money. They just need to. They can't be, doing teams this sort of service, if you will. It's just not fair. I mean, like you say, like Taylor's mentioned, he tried to buy the team and tried to buy Force India in 2018 when it went up for sale, I guess. But apparently he said that Perez's actions put the administration cancelled that, and then it sounds like he inferred that he teamed up with Mazepin's consortium to buy the team.
He put out a post on. I actually read it earlier. He put out a post on social media saying that they were separate bids. It was Rich Energy and a separate Russian entity that bid for it.
Oh,
Both bids were bigger than the price Stroll got it for, but because Perez put it into administration, that's how the Stroll consortium managed to win it.
yeah,
Just thought I'd put that in.
Yeah, fair enough. But I even remember at the time someone dug up because when they bid, everyone was like, "Who the hell are these guys?" And someone found their accountancy, and they saw their operating profit was like 70 grand or something ridiculous. So again, they're very fishy. But if they bring the money, fair enough. Go for it.
Fix up your PR.
Exactly. Fix up your PR. I mean that's I mean the whole white bikes logo copyright infringement. I mean what a mess that is. I mean they are a bit of a comedy club, but like I say, he's a character, and I guess we need them in F1. It's quite like you say. I don't think they're going to go back to Haas. He says their poor performance on and off the track. He mentioned that that they now have to have pay drivers. And you think William Story and Mazepin will probably get on fine, but so I think it'll be Alfa Romeo.
Yeah, I think it's like a unanimous thing. It only really points to Alfa Romeo. They're in the worst situation out of the three people, the three backmarker teams, realistically, because there's rumours that the Alfa Romeo bit will leave and it'll go back to operating just as Sauber. Then you've got Williams, who they've had their new owners who are probably going to invest in the team as well with different types of sponsors. So there could be that type of a connection to Williams, but I don't see anywhere else other than Alfa Romeo because there's been so massive links towards them. It just the only place that makes sense. I don't think they are a good thing for F1 because they're just as Tom said, they're just a comedy club. This is the pinnacle of motorsport. We've got someone who photoshops himself into helicopters trying to be a title sponsor of an F1 team. If they bring the money, they bring the money, but
exactly.
I don't think they're going to bring the money. So I think it being a minor one is probably better for them as a whole. But he did mention that they're in the pipelines to try and become a major sponsor, and well, if they become a major sponsor with a team, that team must be in some real grave issues.
It's interesting that you mention that because in the video that they released on Sunday, Williams' story did mention that the pandemic has completely changed F1's financial landscape, which kind of does point to it being a cash-strapped team.
Interesting what he said, actually. I mean, again, huge grain of salt, huge pinch of salt, but he did say, he mentioned that, sponsors are now cheaper because F1's struggling financially. And I just think, hold on, is this guy speaking facts? Is he, like, you can never tell with him.
Yeah,
Yeah, go on.
he's a shady businessman, really. Like, you can't
Yeah.
really trust a lot of what he says. Like, when you read what people are saying or interpreting off that message you put out the other day, it's so mixed what people are saying. Some people are just like, it's total rubbish, don't take anything seriously. And then there's other people saying, no, it's serious stuff, and he is going to be sponsoring a team this year.
What I will say as well, I don't know if I'm picking up on it, and I shouldn't be, but he did, and this is a quote I'm pretty sure, he said, "Our good friends over at Doralton Capital," when he was talking about Williams. So maybe they're going to Williams, but I mean, that would just be, for lack of a better phrase, pissing on Claire Williams' grave. If Williams becomes Rich Energy Williams and they're a Mercedes B team, I mean, if you go back and watch, Drive to Survive season 1, and Claire's saying, "Oh yeah, we're never going to become a B team." Oh yeah, and
it goes against everything she's
it
ever
goes
said.
against any fibre of the Williams family tradition. I mean, it would just be outrageous. But we're just gonna have to wait and see.
I think like one saving grace for Williams, and like why I don't think it will be Williams, is going back to that point about story talking about the financial landscape of F1 currently with COVID, is that Doralton have come in and wiped the entire existing debt Williams had racked up, and they've already put plans in place, I believe, to renovate the facilities back at Grove. So personally, I do think it's more likely to be one of the Ferrari power customer teams, considering that those two teams are going to be, especially if Alfa Romeo do end up to part, which I'll get onto in a bit, they're more likely to be in need of cash rather than Williams, who do look slightly more financially stable now.
It's interesting that you do mention the way that Darlington have actually effectively wiped Williams' slate clean. It's like if they go from their rapid drop down the grid, and then you mix that with the potential for Rich Energy sponsoring them, it just doesn't have any good signs for the team moving forward. So if they can avoid a Rich Energy sponsorship and get legitimate, I say that with quotation marks because I don't know if Rich Energy are legitimate, but if they can get better sponsors than Rich Energy, which they definitely, I think, can, then it just points them in a much better place than if they were stuck with Rich Energy.
Yeah, I'm firmly with you guys in the camp that it's going to be Alfa Romeo. In terms of Haas, they've been struggling for the past 2 seasons now, and they look like they're going to struggle again this year. That they won't be able to fire up the Ferrari engine until testing. One of the drivers still hasn't visited the factory. They've got all this controversy with Mazepin, and the fact they've had to take on a pay driver despite all the stuff surrounding him over the winter shows how much they're in dire straits. And for Gene Haas, there's been a lot of speculation over the last year or so about whether he will carry on. And for him, if Haas just linger around at the back, he's not getting much out of it. So he could, in theory, look for a quick sale. I wouldn't be surprised if Mazepin's dad ended up ultimately buying the team, and then we could see maybe Rich Energy come in there. But I don't see that. I don't think Gene Haas would be desperate enough to have to do a quick sale that would see Rich Energy involved. So that leaves Alfa Romeo as the likely option. And what's interesting about Alfa Romeo is that it did come out in the week that they might potentially be abandoning F1 and seeking an entry into Formula E. That wouldn't be a surprise either, because Alfa Romeo are a big car brand. They don't really want to have their brand reflected at the back of an F1 grid. So that'll put the team back in the hands of the Sauber group. They would then probably be seeking a big investor in the team, and then a title sponsor as well, which Rich Energy would provide, and that could theoretically lead on to a switch in engine manufacturer, because Renault have spoken openly about wanting to supply another team. They've now lost McLaren, so they are only supplying the Works Alpine team. And a customer team would give them extra data and also a place to put their young drivers. So Sauber could be a genuine option for Rich Energy, and I would not be surprised if we saw a Rich Energy Sauber Renault team on the grid for 2022.
yeah, and obviously there's word of the new teams coming in as well. I guess you said about Renault, Sauber Renault. I think that is generally very plausible. But obviously that's all dependent on whether Alfa Romeo obviously pull the plug or not. But at the moment it's leaning more towards them in fact pulling the plug. And then obviously moving on to the new teams really, obviously on the subject about Renault and possible customer teams in the future. There's a few teams that are obviously looking to enter the grid in the future for 2022 or 2023. They're sort of looking around at the moment. So the first team that's really sort of stated their interest is a team called Team Panthera Asia. Now, upon some research, there's not a lot of much of them out there, but there's been some interviews with some of the executives in the team. So what we gather is that they're an Asian-backed operation, but they are based in the UK. They did want to enter for this season, but when I think it was 2019, I think Ross Brawn said that they didn't really want any new teams coming in for 2021. They'd rather wait out and see them come in 2022 and 2023. Obviously, there's obviously the £200 million entry fee that was unveiled last year. That really put a dent to quite a lot of teams that were looking at coming into the sport. However, Stefano Domenicali stated, I think it was last week, that they could waive the fee in certain circumstances, which has reignited a lot of teams' interest into the sport. Upon research on this Panthera team, anyway, they're run by Benjamin Durand, who's ex SMP racing manager. He has experience operating the World Endurance Championship outfit. So obviously they've got some serious players in their team at the moment, but there's not a lot really to say about them. There's no social media or anything like that. It's quite a bit shady, really.
Well, it's interesting though you do mention their team manager, because he ran a really really tight ship with SMP when they were in WEC. They were a very good privateer team, so I think him running what would be a privateer F1 team is a plausible thing. I think that they can operate on a smaller budget to other teams because of his WEC experience, but it all just matters on the fee, the entry fee, because if it stays, it's going to put a lot of people off, especially this team. But if they get backers behind them and they can enter it, then all for it. New team on the grid is what F1 needs going into the new sort of like new regulations, especially with the sort of the stalemate that it's got at the moment, where there's just too many good drivers that can't get a seat because of the way the Formula One is at the moment. When you look at like the backlog of F1 quality drivers, these new teams that will come in, they can look at those drivers and there can be people that didn't get a fair shot in F1 but have experience, or people who got good backers but are actually really talented compared to your average pay driver. They could also get a chance as well. So there could be more just overall bigger talent spread across the field in terms of a higher quality grid.
Yeah, and I think as well with new teams, just in general, when you talk about the drivers, yes, you've got drivers, just off the top of my head, like Magnussen. I mean, he's clearly F1 standard, and I'm not saying he would want to go and join a new team because I think he left Haas because there weren't any options higher than them. But yes, people like Magnussen, and as well, young talented drivers. I think about Ocon, for example. He won GP3, and he sort of got fast tracked into a team. And because you're in that environment where you're going to be at the back of the grid, there's no pressure. You just learn as much as possible. And he's used that career momentum to then go into Force India. He surprised everyone, and now he obviously had a year out. But now he had a year at Renault. He's got stronger as the year went on, and he's clearly F1 standard. And we need teams like that who, yes, they might be at the back of the grid to start off with at least, but we need those. And obviously, you don't want a HRT running around at the back, barely making the 107% time, or we don't want a false dawn like a US F1. But I think if F1 do manage to get new teams in, that's great news. There's really no downside to it that I'm thinking of at all.
Yeah, like obviously the 200 million, I think that was the fee that they introduced.
Yeah.
That was introduced to stop phony entries like USF1, teams that didn't have like the funds they said they had or weren't ready to enter, or teams at the back of the grid like we had Lotus, Virgin, and HRT in 2010 that throughout their 3 years, well, HRT 3 years, and then the other two teams a bit further on the line, they didn't really make any progress up the grid. They never threatened the midfield. So from that perspective, you can kind of understand why they've introduced it, because if we're going to have teams come in, we want them to be relatively competitive. But on the same token, no team looking to enter is going to pay 200 million just to be on that grid come Bahrain, Melbourne, wherever the season opener is going to be in a couple of years' time. The cost to set up a team alone and run a team is extortionate. How on earth is a privateer team going to sanction 200 million just to turn up? Like, that's ludicrous. And Haas have proven you can come in and be competitive with the right help. So as long as a team got their entry like ratified by the FIA and it all went through clear, good. If they got help from like a team like Haas did, they would soon be competing in that midfield.
Yeah, you mentioned that there's more information out there, but that's good. They seem like they've got a massive sort of plan to follow, and it looks like it's been set in motion. They've got they want to use the Campos facilities, and Campos are I think they entered F1 previously in the 80s, or the owner drove in F1 in the 80s, so they do have some history in Formula One. They are an established junior team with links to like people in Spanish motorsport to help promote them into racing. So if this Monaco team can use those facilities, that's very good for them. But their manager as well has a much more extensive history in Formula One compared to the Panthera manager, because obviously with Arrow, Superguri, and HRT, that is quite a. I'm not gonna say it's not like a really boastful CV, but it's still F1 experience regardless. No matter how successful it was, that's still key in some regards to building a team. And the fact that there's been driver names floating around with them is quite interesting in my opinion, because it just shows that there's actually a lot of weight behind the rumor that they're going to join, because usually you won't see any driver information until they've actually confirmed that they're entering a series. I'm pretty sure HRT, Virgin, Lotus, when they all joined, they didn't confirm their drivers until they'd actually confirmed that they were joining, or they would confirm them at the same time as joining. I think obviously, more cars on the grid is much better for the sport, but this seems like it's actually a serious effort. And if it can come in as Monaco F1 team, it's just not only going to be good for the sport, but as you've said, Monaco, the actual principality, they want to use it to help push Monaco's like influence, which it's a very small, because it's being a principality, it is not a need to know basis type of country, but it is a very not as a popular country compared to other places in motorsport. So it is definitely one to watch, and if it does enter F1, I would be keen to see how they operate and how their first season goes.
Yeah, and I think talking about the 200 million fee, I think, as you mentioned earlier, I think it's just there as a deterrent for teams that aren't taking it seriously. And if sort of comparing it to a football example, the EFL have a background check, which isn't that great, but there's still meant to be a background check for potential investors to see if they're serious or not when buying a team, for example. And I think that's the sort of model they're going to try and use in F1. They're going to do a proper background check. They're going to make sure they have sponsors. They're going to make sure that there is actual money there. And so we don't end up with a HRT who are plummeting around the back, barely making qualifying or barely making the race, sorry. And I think as well, when we talk about Panthera as well, there's no shame in having a Haas style model where you're buying a lot of parts. That's absolutely respectful. And Haas showed that they made it work. They were, on average, the fourth quickest team in 2018. And so it's shown it's definitely viable. And then from there, then you can build your foundations, and then you can go and develop your own car. So I think I don't want to get too excited because I feel like it's going to let us down, or they're not going to really join and it will just be for nothing. So I don't want to get too excited just yet. But if two teams come into F1 and we get back to a 24 car grid, that would be excellent, because I think 10 teams isn't enough. And just as well, in terms of, we mentioned it a little bit, I think, with Panthera, they are sort of intrinsically linked with Renault. Because obviously, as you mentioned, with Sauber as well, with the potential Alfa Romeo leaving, Sauber might go to Renault engines because Renault want that B team. If you think about driver academies, Ferrari, they've got Alfa Romeo and they've got Haas. Mercedes, they've got Williams. If we look at Russell, who else is there? We've got Red Bull, obviously.
Really Williams,
AlphaTauri. Yeah, but it's still, but Mercedes Academy isn't that big. If we look at the Renault Academy, that Renault and Alpine
academy.
Yeah, it's a huge academy. They've got a big facility at Enstone as well for like the driver camp. They sponsor a lot of the lower formulas, like the Formula, Renault Open Series and regional as well. I think they do. So obviously it's now Alpine, yes.
Yeah, I think it's the Formula Alpine regional, because they used to obviously have the World Series by Renault. That then died.
Yeah.
They had Formula Renault last year using the new sort of F3 regional cars, and they merged that this year with that grid and the Formula European grid, which it's very good for junior drivers. That
exactly.
merge, actually.
Yeah, and it shows they are committed to junior levels of F1, but they don't have a place to put their drivers. And that's what they want. Obviously now they don't even have an engine supplier. So I think they are really looking to have a B team, and I think a new team would allow them to do that. If the talks with Alfa Romeo, if they stay on, we don't really know about that. And that will, and especially, I mean, from my point of view, if Panthera do come in, remember they are Asian backed. I mean, Guan Yu Zhou's surely going to get a seat there. He's Chinese. He's a Renault junior. I mean, surely that's
it's a very good
exactly. Surely that's going to be one of the drivers. But yeah, I think I think it's exciting, and I just really hope that it comes to fruition and we don't get left with the talk just evaporating.
Yeah, I think we're all in firm agreement that F1 does need more teams on the grid. Like 10's fine. 10's probably the minimum we can get away with. 20 cars, 20 seats. but the amount of talent going to waste, like Magnussen, Kvyat, etc., and then the amount of talent coming through that might not even make it onto the grid because there's not enough cars, especially looking at Renault now with their stacked academy, Lundgaard, Joe, Piastri. There's plenty of others coming up as well, I'm sure. We definitely need more more teams coming onto the grid.
I fully agree, yeah.
But it's not just like Renault. You know, Red Bull, they've had an oversaturated academy for ages. So if any of their drivers fall out, Renault could pick them up as well and use them for a second team, which not only just saves people's careers, but it just brings more talent into F1 regardless, which is just only better for the sport and for fans.
Indeed. So I think that will wrap it up nicely for the second episode of the Paddock Talk podcast. We hope you have enjoyed this one. Slightly shorter one. We're going to try and keep it below an hour, unlike last week's. It will depend on the topics, really. This week was pretty simplified topics to go through. The episodes will be going up on YouTube and Spotify. We did manage to get that sorted out, so you can check it out on video format on the YouTube, or if you're looking to watch the audio version on the go, then Spotify is the platform to look out for. But we hope you have enjoyed, and we'll see you next time on the Paddock Talk podcast.